Yeah. Yeah.
The first night I met the man I would eventually get married to, we decided to meet up at like a really odd hour in the night. He got off a bus to come see me. Like, that kind of sounds weird. Basically, he took the bus to come see me where I was at. It was really late. It was London. And I thought it was, oh my God, it's so romantic. And I remember as soon as we like shook hands and then started walking, within about like 2 or 3 minutes, I realized that he was walking like an entire block ahead of me. Like, not a few steps. It was like a full block. And it was almost as if I wasn't even there. And I remember like thinking to myself, like, oh my God, that's so mysterious. How enigmatic. I think I was genuinely intrigued, which sounds like really weird in hindsight. And I really want you to hold that image for this entire video because that moment tells you so much about, or everything you need to know about, the next 6 years of my life. And the fact that I found it so interesting and intriguing and enigmatic should tell you so much about where my mind and maturity was at. This almost 24-year-old girl clearly didn't know much about herself. This video is about anxious attachment, but not in the abstract textbook way you've probably read all about it on the internet. This is about what it looks like from the inside in a marriage over years when you don't even have the language for what's happening to you yet. And more importantly, it's about what it takes to get out of that pattern for good. I want to be super clear about one thing though. I'm not making this video to villainize the person I was married to or avoidant people in general. Avoidant attachment, just like anxious attachment, comes from somewhere. It is a survival strategy that makes sense at some point in someone's life. And what I am here to talk about is that dynamic that gets created when these two attachment styles meet and what it costs the anxiously attached person over time and how you break that pattern. I also want to say this before we go any further. If you are anxiously attached, this is not a life sentence. It's not who you are, I promise. It is a response to early experiences that taught you that love was something that you had to earn, chase, or perform for. And it can absolutely change, but only if you are willing to do the work, which I will get to at the end of this video. I was married for about 5 years, together for 6, and the divorce was finalized early 2023. I was 25 when I got married in 2017 to someone who was 9 years older than me. And looking back now, the anxious-avoidant dynamic was not something that developed over time in our marriage. It was there from the very first night we met. I just didn't know what I was looking at. All right, let's dive in. Recognition 1. The feeling that I mistook as chemistry. Let's talk about that. When you are anxiously attached, the person who triggers or activates your nervous system the most powerfully is rarely the person who is warmest or the most consistent with you. It is the person who recreates a feeling from the past you already know because it feels familiar. And your nervous system cannot always tell the difference between familiar and safe. Think about it this way. If you grew up around someone, a parent, a caregiver, a close relationship, a friend, whoever, who was sometimes warm, sometimes cold, sometimes present, sometimes withdrawn, you learned very early on that love is something basically unpredictable, something you have to earn, watch for, work toward. And when you meet an adult partner who operates the same way, something in your body goes, wait, I know this. I know how to do this. And this kind of feels like home, even when home was not a safe place. I grew up with some of those dynamics around me, and so when I met this man and felt this pull, that nervous excitement, that constant wondering where I stood with this man, my nervous system immediately recognized it. Unfortunately, it didn't recognize it as a red flag, but as home. Dr. Sue Johnson, who pioneered the emotionally focused couples therapy and wrote this amazing book, Hold Me Tight, which I will link in description, describes this as the attachment system getting activated. When we feel uncertain about whether someone is truly available to us, our brain goes on high alert. We become hyper vigilant. We literally scan for signals, and we mistake that state of activation for attraction, for depth, for chemistry, because it feels like so intense. The butterflies I felt in those early months were not excitement. They were basically my anxiety. It was my nervous system signaling to me that something was off, and I just didn't know the difference. And before we were even officially together, the pattern was already running in the background. Like, he would pursue me really intensely, paint a picture of a really warm and fuzzy future, be really nice and attentive, and then go quiet for days. And I remember at this some point, in this relationship that was almost very new, I went on a Europe trip with my mom, and he went on a work trip for a couple of weeks, and he barely messaged me for 2 weeks. And when he finally got back in touch with me, he didn't even acknowledge the fact that he was silent all these days. And I remember bawling my eyes out. I was basically crying over a man I wasn't even sure I was fully attracted to yet, because my nervous system was already in that reach and wait sort of a cycle that would define basically the next 6 years of my life. That is what anxious attachment looks like before you even have a name for it. Let's talk about recognition 2, which is the warning signs I chose to overlook. Looking back, there were signs at every single stage of this relationship before we were even together, and I chose to rationalize every single one of them rather than taking them seriously. I mean, I was also like kind of young, and I know 24, 25 is not like young for American standards, but for South Asian standards, we are quite sheltered. So your sense of self hasn't developed until much later in life, unfortunately. So let's kind of peel back the layers on some of these. First, the woman who introduced us was herself someone I had a complicated friendship with. She was very like passive, aggressive, hot, cold, and eventually I found out that she had herself been living a very dual life. There was infidelity in her marriage, and she was actually with my ex-husband's best friend, and the fact that this guy that I was dating kind of knew about it and was unbothered was information. If you think about it, like, that's weird. You are who you surround yourself with. But again, like, I just chose to set it aside and I didn't really do much about it. Then his ex-girlfriend, the woman that he had been with before me, she didn't even know that they had broken up. And by this time we had already been declared like engaged. He simply never had the conversation with her, and I remember thinking at the time, like, wow, he really cannot face a difficult conversation. And then I stayed anyway, even as that exact same inability to face difficult conversations would become the defining feature of our entire marriage eventually. Then his best friend was someone who was inappropriately like enmeshed in our relationship from the beginning, and there were like inappropriate talks of how his best friend would have dated me had we not been getting married. And instead of like shutting that kind of nonsense down, my then fiance kind of chuckled and was happy to get his friend's validation about his choice to marry me. And that was honestly like so yucky, like thinking back to that time. I noticed that dynamic and basically said nothing about how distasteful that whole thing was. Then 2 months before we got married, he almost called the whole thing off. I kid you not. And basically I want to give you a little context for like why even. What had been happening was that I was trying to have normal like pre-wedding conversations, asking about decisions that needed to be made, asking like why he wasn't proactively like calling me in a loving fashion, or just even showing any real excitement about us getting married. A healthy couple is nervous and excited and making plans before their wedding. He responded to those conversations by completely withdrawing and eventually saying that maybe we shouldn't get married at all. And it felt less like cold feet to me and more like a way to shut the conversation down entirely, because asking for normal things had somehow become too much for him. And my family had, as you know, South Asian weddings had already made all the arrangements. My dad, unfortunately, was quite sick at the time. And instead of having one honest conversation with me, he just went quiet and made that really sweeping statement that basically sent my entire family in a state of panic. And that avoidance was honestly quite off-putting for me at a level that should have told me everything. But again, I chose to still get married. So there I was, I kept rationalizing all of these things because anxious attachers are extraordinarily good at two things: giving other people the benefit of the doubt and quietly absorbing responsibility for other people's behaviors. If something felt off, I assumed I did something to cause it. If he withdrew, I reached out harder. Anxious attachers are so focused on maintaining that connection that we stop asking whether the connection is even good for us. Recognition 3, this is actually one of my favorite ones. I don't want to say favorite because this entire video is about recalling a lot of not so nice things about my past, but it's called the demon dance. Once we were married and living together, that dynamic that I just explained to you had been flickering in the background. It became the entire weather system of our home. Again, going back to Dr. Sue Johnson, she calls this the demon dance. It is the specific cycle that plays out between an anxiously attached person and an avoidant person. And once it starts, it's almost impossible to stop without both people doing some serious work. The anxious person feels disconnected, reaches out, tries to make contact. The avoidant person feels super overwhelmed or pressured by that reaching and completely withdraws. Then the anxious person, now more frightened by this withdrawal, reaches like harder, and the avoidant person pulls further away. So, this cycle kind of feeds itself, getting more extreme with every rotation. That was my marriage. I would try to start a conversation and he would go silent for not hours, like definitely days. And then I would apologize for things I wasn't so sure what he was upset about exactly. And then it would just end in silence. And then I would shrink myself, adjust my tone, change my approach, try a different strategy, try no strategy at all, because anything felt better than silence. And then he would come around eventually in a couple of days, briefly warm, briefly present, and then my entire nervous system would like exhale a sigh of relief, and I would think, okay, like we're okay, until the next cycle would start. And there was like another layer to this that I want to name because I think that it is more common than people admit. From around the second year of our marriage, divorce became something that he would bring up quite often during major arguments, like not once, multiple times, like across multiple years. And what that does to an anxiously attached person is devastating, because every time that word enters the room, your nervous system goes into like full panic mode. You stop being able to think clearly about what is actually being discussed. You just need the threat to somehow go away. So you apologize, you shrink, you do whatever it takes to de-escalate, because the alternatives basically feel unsurvivable. And I think saying or like bringing up divorce that many times eventually made it a reality, because the desire to actually work on things was never there. I didn't really see it. And anytime I tried to say, okay, you know what, like I hear you, but I also need you to take a look at this part, I was basically shut down. And if he ever violated any of my privacy, like sharing something I had told him in confidence with someone outside of our marriage, and then if I called that out, I was told that I had behaved in a way that made him do it. So basically, I was being punished for not being compliant, and there was never any accountability, but there was always a reason for everything to be my fault, if that makes sense. What made this particular version of the demon dance even more disorienting was that his avoidance was not just emotional distance, it leaned into what is often described as dismissive avoidance, where connection and emotional need feel not just uncomfortable, but something to be minimized or sidestepped rather than engaged with. And for an anxiously attached person, that combination is particularly destabilizing, because the more you reach, the less you get, and the less you get, the harder you reach. And I want to give you one example that I think captures this perfectly, even though I hate to recall it. So I'm in the US, I have a green card. Green card applications for Indian-born applicants can take literally years because there are so many of us applying. And it can even sometimes, depending on your visa, take like a decade because of how long the quota queue is. But because I was born in the UAE rather than India, we qualified for a different country quota entirely, which meant that we could skip that wait and we could get our green cards much sooner than we had expected. He called my name out while I was in the shower, and there was like real excitement in his voice. So obviously I got really excited and I hopped out of the shower with shampoo still in my hair, heart racing. And then he told me the news that, you know, we're able to bypass this massive queue. And we were both smiling and we were so like excited. And then within a few seconds, as soon as he registered how happy I was, his face like completely went like, and then he said to me like, this is something I'm doing for you. I'm not personally very interested. And just like that, the joy left the room because mine had entered it somehow. Recognition 4, being told that you are the problem. This is the part I want anxiously attached women to really hear, because I know how many of you have been told this, some version of this. At some point in my marriage, I was told that I was a narcissist, not once, regularly. If I got excited talking about my work at a dinner party, I was a narcissist and I was doing too much. If I advocated for something I wanted or needed in my marriage, that was considered selfish or self-centered. If I was offered a better job that paid me more, those were honestly the most morose days in our condo. If I wanted to buy a house, because, you know, we had been renting for years in the US and I wanted to feel settled as an immigrant, I was told that I was trying to tie him down in the US and he wanted to eventually like move back to wherever in India he was from, or Kashmir. If I pursued anything creative, editing videos a certain way, you know, being expressive on social media, the things that he genuinely loved about me before we got married, I was called cringe in capitals. Every single thing he liked about me before we got married gradually became something that created friction, like the most friction. And I was like, where is this coming from? Because you loved these things about me. And I remember like I was like this dodo who used to go to, well, not dodo for going to therapy, but dodo for like crying over something like this. I used to like cry to my therapist and ask, oh my God, am I like a narcissist? Do I take up too much space? Am I self-centered? Am I selfish? Is there something like wrong with me? And my therapist, I remember, she like looked at me dead in the eye and she said, listen, Sabreen, I really want you to hear this. The fact that you are this worried about it, the fact that you are so invested in understanding if you're a narcissist and you want to fix it, is an answer in itself. Narcissists do not lie awake wondering if they are the problem. They are convinced that they are not the problem at all. And what I was experiencing was gaslighting. And it is one of those, like one of the most common experiences for people in dismissive avoidant relationships, because when someone is deeply uncomfortable with accountability and emotional depth, it is often easier to locate the problem in the other person than to sit with their own discomfort. And I want to be honest about something though. Anxious attachment is not blameless either. We do things in our anxiety that are very hard to be around for other people, right? Like the over explaining, the reassurance seeking, the protest behaviors, the moments of emotional flooding or dysregulation. I'm not excusing any of that. What I am saying is that those behaviors are also often responses to feeling unsafe, and they are manageable with the right support and the right partner. They are not evidence that you are too much. They are evidence that you were not in a safe enough relationship to regulate yourself. And here is what kind of finally gave me clarity on my situation. After the divorce, I found out that the guy I was married to, he remarried within like a year of the divorce, decided to stay in the US, didn't go back to where he wanted to go, and he bought a house with the new lady. The very things that I had been told I was holding him back from, he went ahead and almost immediately did all those things. And for me, that information was such a huge sigh of relief because I felt so validated in that moment. It was so clarifying. It told me that those desires, wanting a stable home, wanting to feel settled, wanting to build something together, like whether to have kids or not, they were all very reasonable questions that you should be able to, powwow with your partner with. And they were clearly things he also wanted, but obviously he just didn't want those things with me and liked keeping me on the very edge of the cliff. And understanding that finally helped me let go of the idea that if I had done something differently, the outcome would have been different. Recognition 5. It was never about you. Here is the thing that took me the longest to understand and that I most want you to take away from this video. The pattern was there from the very first night. The man walking a whole block ahead of me on that London street while I trailed behind thinking it was mysterious and exciting. The ex-girlfriend who didn't even know that we had broken up because he could never face having a difficult conversation with her. The almost cancelled wedding where instead of talking to me, he went completely quiet. It was all right there in front of me. All those signals, all that time. This was not something that, these issues were not things that developed because of things I did or didn't do in the marriage. This is who he was when he arrived, and when he married me, I now truly believe it was for reasons that had nothing to do with genuine readiness for partnership. It was the family pressure to get married, the rebound from the painful rejection with his ex-girlfriend, the validation his best friend's interest in me gave him. None of that was something I could have fixed, no matter how much I tried, how much I changed, or how much I adjusted. And the things he eventually cited as reasons for the marriage falling apart were the same things he praised about me literally in our wedding film. I have it on tape. My openness, my creativity, my ambition, my ability to fill a room with laughter, over time, I think that they became harder for him to be around because they were a reminder of everything he hadn't yet figured out about himself, I guess. But one thing was very clear, that the mask had fallen. All right, now let's talk about what it takes to heal. So what do you actually do with all this information, my lovely anxious attacher? I want to be direct here because I think a lot of the healing content on the internet is pretty like fluff and vague, and it doesn't always help everyone. At least it didn't always help me. The first thing is the hardest. You have to stop filtering everything through your wound. Anxious attachment means that we hear things, we experience things through the lens of our earliest fears. Am I lovable? Like, am I enough? Will they leave? And that filter, I think, distorts everything. It makes us reach when we should observe. It makes us give other people the benefit of the doubt when we should be paying attention. And healing means learning to hear what people are actually showing you and not what you hope they mean. Don't fall for potential. Believe facts. You cannot fix or heal an avoidant person. I know it's a cruel thing to say, but it's a very liberating one. Their avoidance belongs to them. Their work is theirs to do. It is not your job to be patient enough, loving enough, understanding enough to break through it. If someone is not doing their own work, your love cannot do it for them. And the way you become more securely attached is not by finding the right person. It is by doing your own inner work first. That means therapy. That means learning to self-soothe without needing external validation. It means understanding where your patterns come from so they can stop running your decisions. It means building a relationship with yourself that is so solid that you stop accepting bare minimum breadcrumbs because you have stopped mistaking them for a whole loaf. When you do the work, you stop attracting the same dynamic and it's not because the universe rewards good behavior, but because you stop choosing it. You start to recognize the familiar ache of an avoidant connection for what it is and not confuse it with chemistry. You should never have to beg someone to love you. I want to say this as clearly as possible. Print this out on a piece of paper, plaster it over your walls, I don't care. Please do not beg anybody for their time, their attention, their emotional presence, their celebration of your wins, their basic decency. If you are having to work so hard to feel loved by someone in a relationship, that is not love. And you know deep down in your heart that you deserve so much more than that. I see so many women around me who are literally like exhausted, who are self-blaming, who are developing real physical symptoms from the chronic stress of trying to win over someone who has decided on some level that they are not going to let themselves be won. Your body keeps score of that. Your nervous system keeps score of that. And no amount of trying harder changes the scorecard. Keep your standards high. Please. Know your worth. Water down for absolutely nobody. The right person will not require you to become smaller in order for them to stay. That is literally the simplest test there is in a relationship. Okay, Lovey, I want to end where I started, at that bus stop in London. I was 23 years old, standing on a pavement, watching a man walk a whole block ahead of me, and I thought it was enigmatic. I spent the next 6 years chasing that feeling, trying to close that gap, trying to get him to turn around and walk beside me. He never did. And here is what I know now that I wish I had known back then. The right person does not walk so far ahead of you and wait for you to catch up. The right person walks with you. If this resonated, or if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I promise I try to read and reply to every single one. And if you want more content just like this, please stick around because I have so much more coming for you. See you next time.